Welcome to the deep dive. You've given us some really compelling material today, excerpts from Eddie S. Glaude Jr.'s book, We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For.
Yeah, it grew out of his W.E.B. Du Bois lectures, and it's quite a profound reflection on, well, the last decade or so.
It really is. And our goal here, our mission in this deep dive, is to unpack this material, explore the key ideas, rethinking leadership, where change comes from.
And pull out the most important insights for you, the listener.
Exactly. Glaude starts by framing the years since his original lectures in 2011 as a period of troubles. He doesn't shy away from how heavy that felt.
No, he jumps right in, reflecting on how that decade felt like it just consumed his attention. So much turmoil since he first gave those lectures.
And he's very specific about the weight of those years, the police killings of black people, for instance.
He names them, Philando Castile.
Seeing Alton Sterling's son weeping, 9-year-old Judea Reynolds watching George Floyd, it's visceral.
It is, and he presents these not just as events, but as like haunting moments that really define that time. He links that violence to the rise of white supremacist groups, too.
The alt-right, as it was often called.
Right, Charlottesville. That awful Jews will not replace us chant. The shootings in El Paso, Buffalo.
And he argues it wasn't random. It was tied to this fear about demographic shifts, the browning of America.
Exactly, fueling this, sort of longing for a lost past among some white Americans, a deep anxiety.
He also gets into the political upheaval, Trump's election.
A huge shock for many. He, Glaude, admits he was certain it wouldn't happen. He'd even argued against supporting Hillary Clinton back then.
Right, hoping to push the Democratic Party on issues facing black America.
And he says now very clearly he was terribly wrong.
And looking back at that period, Glaude describes the Trump years as giving, license to greed, selfishness, and hatred.
That's his assessment. He sees it as revealing an ugly underside of the country, this tricky magic around race where fears get weaponized, turned into scapegoats.
And then, on top of all that, COVID.
Yeah, the pandemic, just horrific. The scale of death, over 1 million Americans.
And hitting black communities disproportionately hard. He talks about losing a friend.
The strangeness of those virtual funerals.
Yeah.
He mentions the computer kept freezing, that lack of, real public grieving rituals.
It sounds incredibly difficult. And then there was the whole wave of distrust, misinformation.
Oh, absolutely. He mentions Trump pushing hydroxychloroquine, the feeling that a circus clown had hijacked the microphone.
The backlash against masks in the name of liberty.
Right, conspiracy theories exploding,
Yeah.
and the stark reality for essential workers.
Yeah.
Still seen as disposable, facing the virus.
It's a really heavy picture he paints. He talks about time feeling compressed, like James Baldwin described. Past and present all mushed together.
Memory is a living thing, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The past is this mosaic of ruins shaping right now.
So those original 2011 lectures were focused on Obama's presidency, black politics.
Right, imagining a more democratic politics then. But returning to it for this book, his focus, it shifted.
It pivoted. How so?
Well, instead of looking primarily at politicians, or who he calls court prophets.
People putting all their faith in elected leaders.
Exactly. He wanted to turn the focus inward, to explore, to mine what was possible in us.
Okay. And that's where he brings in people like Emerson, Baldwin, Dewey.
Ella Baker.
Yes. Using their thought to map out this politics he terms black democratic perfectionism.
Black democratic perfectionism. What's the heart of that idea?
At its core, it's about ordinary people. You and me. People filled with self-trust who start seeing themselves as the leaders they've been searching for.
So a real skepticism towards those claiming to have all the answers or saying salvation comes from the top.
Precisely. It's a radically different way to think about leadership. And, for you listening, maybe this feeling Glaude describes being overwhelmed, time collapsing, disappointment in leaders, maybe that resonates.
Yeah.
This deep dive, it offers a different angle, looking for possibility not just out there, but, right here, within us.
Okay, let's dig into that. Starting with the idea of the prophetic. Right. We usually think of prophets as, special individuals, maybe the divine calling.
Like Moses or MLK, maybe.
Exactly, towering figures. But Glaude wants to democratize that, rethink what prophecy means in black thought and politics, move away from just handing our power over to someone supposedly called.
And he uses John Dewey, the pragmatist philosopher.
Yeah. Dewey emphasized inquiry, critical thinking, action. So the prophetic act isn't just about receiving divine truth. It's found in how we use our intelligence to look critically at our life together.
Make claims about the common good, explore what's actually possible.
You got it. He looks at Dr. King, of course. We often see him through the Black Church, the American Jeremiah, warning the nation about its sins, racism, poverty.
Seeing them as threats to the nation's soul.
Yes. But Glaude also points to King's own moments of doubt, feeling like he was at the end of his powers. I can't face it alone.
And the response he heard, stand up for righteousness. God will be at your side forever.
Right. And Glaude suggests this kind of faith, which isn't exclusive to religious folks. It fuels imagination. It helps us see beyond the immediate problems, the limit conditions.
To glimpse what Robin Kelly calls freedom dreams, the possibility of something better.
Exactly. And that imagination, it's not passive. It takes courage, action. But here's the key move Glaude makes. He says we can read King's calls for justice, like his 1957 speech, not just religiously, but also politically, constitutionally, democratically.
Ah, okay. So seeing King not only as a religious prophet, but as embodying a democratic potential that's maybe more widespread.
Precisely. And reading him that way challenges how King is sometimes used, especially by elites, to sort of narrow down what counts as legitimate black protest. It shifts the focus
From the prophet out there.
to the prophetic capacity within us.
So King becomes less a singular giant casting a shadow and more an example, showing what's possible for each of us.
That's the idea. The power to unsettle things now by insisting the future isn't fixed. It can be different.
And imagining that better world isn't just wishing, it takes work. King said, we must speed up the coming of the inevitable.
Right. Glaude calls this work readying of the self, or sometimes tending.
Tending, like a garden.
It's a great analogy, actually.
Yeah.
It means cultivating certain things in ourselves, practices, habits, like really caring for strangers, being suspicious of things that deny dignity.
Even being willing to be still, to listen.
Yes. These small, steady practices build the capacity for those bigger moments. He points to SNCC, people like Bob Moses, their ethic of caring for, tending to those deemed invisible, poor black sharecroppers, helping them see their own power.
And King himself evolved, didn't he, after the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts?
He saw that the change had been, in his words, cheap. It hadn't tackled the deep economic structures, that gap between superfluous wealth and abject poverty.
He saw a need for deeper structural
The
change.
change in values. His last sermon text, Behold, I make all things new, was about staying awake through that ongoing revolution.
So the big takeaway on prophecy here is it's not just for the chosen few.
Not at all. It's a capacity we can cultivate, a critical intelligence available to ordinary people. It's about scaling down huge utopian dreams into, achievable ideals that still push us to act, even without guarantees. Prophetic acts happening everywhere in everyday lives.
Okay, so if the prophet isn't necessarily who we thought, what about the hero? Glaude suggests this also involves turning inward, wrestling with our past, our wounds.
Definitely. He uses James Baldwin's struggle with his father's story as a prime example.
Baldwin wrote about history being literally present in all that we do,
Yeah.
shaping our identities, aspirations.
And the great pain and terror that comes with realizing you have to battle that history within yourself to try and recreate yourself on more humane, liberating terms.
That sounds incredibly difficult. Reaching for a higher self, resisting conformity, trusting yourself when the world tells you you're less.
It is. And Glaude suggests we sometimes latch on to heroes as, sort of, surrogates for our own damaged sense of self-worth.
He contrasts this with older ideas of heroism, like Thomas Carlyle's.
Yeah, Carlyle's view was often very masculinist, focused on the singular great soul, leading to hero worship.
But Emerson had a different take.
Right. Emerson worried hero worship could actually block our own path to greatness. He saw great figures as representative men, people who show us human potential, exemplify it, rather than just being authorities to blindly follow.
And applying this to the Black experience, Glaude talks about how slavery's legacy, Jim Crow, how they shaped possibilities, filled society with assumptions.
He looked at different figures or concepts within Black thought, like the race man challenging the white world, building pride, versus the Renaissance man, Ellison, Murray, finding ways to live with artistry and complexity despite oppression, resisting reduction.
And notes the masculine focus often present in those models.
He does. Then he makes them personal. Talks about Malcolm X being his first hero.
Standing in for his father figure, imitating him after converting to Black nationalism.
Yeah. And he discusses Malcolm's autobiography, how its rags to riches feel made it popular, but also brings in critiques like Manning Marable's.
Suggesting the book might have presented a somewhat sanitized version of Malcolm, influenced by Haley, maybe the FBI.
Right. Raising questions about how Malcolm was ultimately presented, Glaude suggests reading the autobiography not just religiously, but maybe as a secular story of self-creation, like Rousseau's Confessions.
Interesting. So it has power beyond just a faith narrative.
Absolutely. So while the book solidifies Malcolm's heroic status and remembering struggles helps ground people today, as Michael Eric Dyson argues.
The key point on heroism isn't just worship.
No, it's about encountering greatness to be educated by it, learning from heroes to figure out how we can embody similar qualities in our own unique way. Heroism isn't out there, separate. It's potential within.
This idea of cultivating potential within leads us straight to Ella Baker and Black democratic perfectionism.
Yes, Glaude really zeroes in on Baker, especially her role in founding SNCC in 1960.
She resisted letting the student energy just get absorbed by King's SCLC, right? Pushed for group-centered leadership.
Crucially, that phrase is key. Her whole philosophy was built on trusting the capacities of ordinary people themselves. Her famous line, "Strong people don't need strong leaders."
So our ability to act prophetically or heroically comes from that self-trust nurtured in community.
That's the idea. He describes her approach using terms like militant egalitarianism and a chastened voluntarist impulse.
Okay, unpack those a bit. Militant egalitarianism.
That's a fierce belief in the absolute equality and value of every single person.
And chastened a voluntarist impulse.
That means she wasn't naive. She knew the harsh realities, the structures trying to crush people's spirits, like Baldwin writing about parents feeling powerless against the world. But despite that, she insisted on the fight for a higher self because she trusted everyone's inherent worth and ability to contribute.
Acknowledging the difficulty but insisting on agency.
Exactly. And her method, he calls it morally motivated experimentalism. Trying things, tinkering, knowing mistakes would happen, but always listening, staying close to the ground.
Very different from top-down leadership.
Fundamentally, patient, inclusive discussion. Each voice was valued. Ideas grew from engagement with the people, not some preset doctrine.
He tells that story about Bob Moses and the judge who dismissed the sharecroppers as illiterates.
Yeah. And Moses understood they weren't ignorant at all. They brought a wealth of experience that could actually teach the nation something vital about who we truly are.
And this is where Glaude really defines Baker's Black democratic perfectionism.
Right. A radical commitment to cultivating democratic individuality among Black people, specifically for the purpose of achieving justice. Finding salvation in and for themselves.
Oh.
Not just deliberation, but the actual emergence of leaders from that grassroots work.
He links it to Sheldon Wollin's idea of fugitive democracy.
Yeah, the idea that real democracy isn't a settled state, an administered society. It's something you have to constantly practice, fight for. It's always slipping away if you don't tend to it.
And building on Douglas seeing law as oppression, Morrison on the value gap, Baker's approach is rooted in the work of the many.
It offers a path between just piety and isolated self-creation. It's active, collective work. Which brings in Bob Moses's phrase.
Earned insurgencies?
Key phrase. It means the hard work on the ground, building trust, listening, organizing, earns you the right to challenge things, earns the respect needed, earns people's willingness to risk everything. SNCC, earn the issues.
This politics of tending, it requires trust, courage, love.
All of it. Cultivating these capacities in ourselves and each other.
So the big conclusion here is that this Black democratic perfectionism, it calls each of us to aim higher, use our talents for justice.
Yes, our uniqueness isn't lost in the group. It's actually realized there. A better world emerges from that richness of standing together. We all have this capacity.
And as Baker and the book titles say,
we are the leaders we have been looking for. That message is aimed right at you, listening now, as your own potential, your own responsibility.
But Glaude is clear this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens amidst ongoing evil, a thicket of thorns, he calls it.
Right, and he brings in Amani Perry's book, Breathe. Her point is crucial. Don't reduce Black life just to suffering, just to racism.
Tend to the inner life, too. Face fears, imagine bigger. Your heritage as wind beneath your wings.
Exactly, knowing who are your people. That Baker question is grounding. Perry's answer to that awful question, isn't it terrifying to raise a Black boy? It isn't despair.
It's confronting the evil but drawing strength from heritage, seeing revolutionary possibility.
Yes, insisting we are more than our circumstances.
Glaude talks about his own abiding faith, not naive, he says.
No. Faith in ordinary people's ability to choose differently, to fight, a willingness to, when ahead of the evidence maybe, believing in possibilities you can't quite see yet. An inheritance, he calls it, from those who survived against all odds.
He mentions Frederick Douglass again. How slavery robbed him of education, limited him, yet his ambition remained. Serve suffering humanity.
That struggle for a higher self, even when caged, it continues.
And Black democratic perfectionism insists this individual quest is part of transforming the world. We're not just objects of racism, we're inheritors facing tough times, and what we do matters.
He uses Coney Morrison's Beloved. So powerful. Paul D tells C, you, your best thing. And her response, me.
That doubt, planted by a devaluing world.
The impact of white assumptions under every dark skin was a jungle. How fighting that can turn inward.
And that scene with Denver and Baby Suggs. Denver's paralyzed by the past, the fear. Baby Suggs is brutally honest. There ain't no foolproof defense against the evil.
But the instruction isn't to hide. It's know it and go on out the yard. Go on.
That's it. See the reality, the thorns, the pain. But don't let it paralyze you. Use it. The past is funded experience, not a cage.
So the call to act isn't abstract. It's about real problems gumming up life, hindering dignity, and it's rooted in love. Yes, he brings it back to Baldwin. Salvation isn't flight. It's found in the going toward, that politics of tending, carried by love.
And he ends that section with those beautiful words from Toni Morrison.
Yeah. Cruelty is a mystery. But if we see the world as one long, brutal game, then we bump into another mystery. The mystery of beauty, of light. The canary that sings on the skull.
There seems to be such thing as grace, beauty, harmony, all wholly free and available to us.
A stunning counterpoint.
Okay, well, let's try to wrap this up. We've journeyed through some difficult recent history in this deep dive. We've questioned traditional leadership models.
And we've landed on this powerful argument that the capacity, the responsibility for change, it actually lives within us.
Right, the call to democratize prophecy, see that potential everywhere. To rethink heroism, not idols, but qualities to cultivate.
And to practice Black democratic perfectionism, tending to ourselves, tending to each other, building collective power, earning our challenges to the status quo through that groundwork.
And the central message, aimed right at you, listening. We are the leaders we have been looking for.
So, thinking about Morrison's image, the canary singing, and Glaude's core message, maybe a final thought for you to take away is this. Even in the thorns, amidst the cruelty, that possibility for grace, beauty, harmony, it is there, available, not earned by defeating others, but found in the tending, caring for yourself, caring for others, striving for justice together.
If Baby Suggs said, know it, and go on out the yard, go on. Morrison sees the canary, Glaude ends with, now fly.
So the question for you is, what does now fly mean in your life, in your efforts, big or small, to make things better, starting right where you are?
Thank you for providing the sources that allowed us to have this conversation, this deep dive today.